Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. Today's video, I want to speak about Rasmus Hojlund and PSR, give a bit of an explanation on the situation ongoing there. I want to talk about the Benjamin Sesko situation as to the present moment, or at least as I've heard anything about it, which I believe is fairly recent. Yeah, something like that. Don't want to talk about Ruben Amorim's comments on his future, on the leadership at United, and also how it affects and relates to some alternative plans and some of the things he said that are well tied into the information that I shared on Saturday and some of the feeling that I've gotten and even talked about over the last week about Bruno Fernandes and Mainoo and the long-term kind of thinking and rebuilding at United. So let's get right into it, and we'll start with, of course, Rasmus Hojlund. Now, in the last 24 hours, there's been a bunch of stories about Rasmus Hojlund speaking about how United value him and would let him go for around £30 million. Now, there's a view that, of course, he might want to be included in the Sesko situation because Leipzig want him. That's part of the complication here, is that, if you want to do a deal there and you have to sell him to Leipzig, well, you'd want to be sure that you're getting Sesko and all sorts of complications in this. But regardless, the point being they want to have suitors out there. He's a good young player still who has potential, has some tools, but it's just not worked at United. I think that perhaps a different league, a different step, a different situation, a different club with a lot less pressure, Rasmus Hojlund could have a decent career, but clearly it's just not been working at United. One good game in preseason doesn't really change that, frankly. Regardless, he should be available for around £30 million. Now, if you go back to the videos earlier in summer, you can happily go check them if you would like. That is around the number I've always heard that he would be available for. When I was talking about Inter in the past, it was my understanding that United would let him go at £30 million for a deal to be done. And one of the things I think that is misunderstood is the PSR and amortization aspect of this. So I wanted to do a very quick explainer and, yes, a couple of PowerPoint slides on it to show really simply how PSR and amortization works and why you can take a loss on a player but save money. It's not really that complicated, but I think that understanding it's, again, important, because otherwise you get the idea, why sell this player at a loss? Why would United do this? Why could this happen? You think selling a player means they've taken a loss and taken a step backwards. And I think this is why people maybe get confused, again, in not understanding PSR in the situation that we're in, as to why United are ending up having more money than they thought. Some of the decisions that have been made over the last year, if you get how PSR works, if you get how the finances work, then these things can make more sense. So without further ado, let's discuss that really quickly. So mini PSR explainer, how United can gain by selling at a loss. Okay. So Rasmus Hojlund, way to look at it, 3 years left on his contract. We're going to assume a rough purchase price of around £70 million. It was 64 million plus add-ons to reach 72 million. We don't know how many add-ons have kicked in. We have no idea. He's made a fair number of appearances. I'd assume some have. So we're just going to say 70. The exact number's not actually that important. If it's lower, then selling at 30 million is even better, but let's just assume it's 70 million. The wages, 80,000 a week reportedly, 4.16 million a year. So when you break the math down on that, the yearly cost to United is 14 million for the purchase, 4.16 million for wages, and that will happen for 3 more years. 25, 26, 26, 27, 27, 28 costs United 18.16 million a year. Essentially, United again, the cash is a different thing. I'm talking about amortization, PSR. He costs 18.16 million per year to United. That's what he costs. Okay, so imagine you bought a boat. You owe 300,000 on this boat. It costs you 24,000 a year in loans, and it costs you 6,000 a year in upkeep and utilities and, you know, renting a space for it and all of that. Okay, so you owe that 300,000. It costs you 24,000 a year in loans and 6,000 a year in utilities and upkeep. You sell it for 275,000. Well, you've lost 25,000. You have to pay the bank that extra 25,000 out of pocket right away to pay off the loan. So you're down 25K. But over the next 12 months, you're actually 5,000 up. You would have usually spent 24,000 and 6,000, which is 30,000, but instead you spent 25,000 today. So between now and the next 12 months, you've actually gained 5,000 from your previous financial position. Okay? Because you've paid 25,000 now to not pay 30,000 over the course of the season, over the course of the next 12 months. So that's what it could work like. A boat. I used a boat instead of a house because you don't have to have, you might need a house. A boat is just a different asset. So Rasmus at 30 million. He's got a yearly cost to United of 18.16 million. So over the next 12 months, you've got to pay 18.16 million for Rasmus Hojlund. You still owe 42. So if you sell for 30 million, you've got to pay 12 million right away. You account for that instantly. 12 million, it's a loss. Like the example of paying the bank 25,000. You have to pay for that loss right off the bat. You have to make up the difference. So you count it in your books, 12 million loss. But over the course of this season, because PSR is a yearly thing, you're replacing that 18.16, like that 24,000 in payments to the bank and 6,000 and all of that for the boat. You're replacing that with a one-time cost of 12 million. So it's costing you 12 million today to not pay 18.16 over the next 12 months. That's a savings over the next 12 months of 6.16 million, and in the following years, it's a savings of 18.16 million per year for 2 more years. As long as you don't want this asset, this is good business. As long as you don't need this asset, it's good business. In the immediate, during this PSR year, 25-26, you're going to save 6 million. Now, the numbers will wash a little bit in there because you've technically already paid a month, and then the amortization is a little lower, so that doesn't matter, but you have paid some salary you're not getting back. So you might be saving a tiny bit less. Maybe it's like 5.5 or something. Regardless, you're saving. So at 30 million, United will be in a better financial position this year than they were before. The other thing we don't know is, how did you pay for Rasmus Hojlund? Did you pay for it in cash? Is it all already paid for? Did we already pay all the installments on it? We don't know. That's different to amortization. It's totally separate. This is an unknown, but if they already paid for, let's say, Rasmus Hojlund's whole fee from a cash perspective, let's say they already did that from a cash perspective. Well, selling him today, maybe they're getting 15 million up front. They actually might improve their cash position because they've already paid Rasmus Hojlund off from a cash perspective, even though amortization is spread out. So they may actually improve their cash position by selling Rasmus Hojlund. So that's an unknown. But I would assume that on that side of it, financially, cash-wise, we can only make assumptions. From a PSR and amortization perspective, we know that there's an improvement in the situation. Obviously, with Rasmus, it hasn't worked out. That being said, we obviously hear a lot. He wants to stay. He doesn't want to leave yet. He wants to fight first place, all of that. But at the same time, what we've also heard, and what I can say to be the case, as it has been since the start of summer, is that if they can get a striker in, if they have what they need, and if they're ready to move him on and there's a deal there, that they would be willing to tell him, you're not on the plans anymore. Should that happen, he will very likely accept the move and will take that move on. But that conversation hasn't happened, and that conversation only will happen should United have a deal for a striker lined up. So, good chance. This is why there's a good chance that he leaves. At this price, I believe there will be clubs interested even beyond potentially Leipzig. But we'll have to see how this plays out. Regardless, it's not United taking a loss and messing up their financial position. It will improve. It is still a gain over the course of the season to do this. Should they do it at this price. Then I want to talk about the leadership aspect, because Ruben Amorim did a big interview with all the kind of traditional media there in a pack on, his time at United. And I thought he made some amazing kind of statements and things, and talking about wanting to stay for 20 years and all of that. And I really like Ruben, and I really think he's going to be successful here. But one of the things, obviously, that he said as well that I did find interesting, because everybody's been wondering, like, what does he do? How does he get like people on board? How does he create this culture? How does he do this? The way that he's done it before. The questions from like sporting fans, like he'll go away for summer. He'll go away for summer, and then suddenly he'll be like, everybody likes him. And he's got the team together, and he's done it, and you can kind of see that already, that this is like what's already happening here. So it's been interesting to see that. And his comments about the leadership make a lot of sense, and his comments about the leaders he's brought in the dressing room, for me, feel like some comparisons to Jose Mourinho. When you kind of look at it. Jose would always have these guys, he'd get these guys in the dressing room that were like essentially like his lieutenants, his guys that would die for him. And it wasn't necessarily everybody, but he'd have these leaders, and he'd get a few of them. And it was how he was able to kind of carry the dressing room more than, he had potentially, in the past. And to maintain control and to do all of that. And so this seems to be, a thing that Ruben Amorim has taken, is to really, really have some serious like leaders, people he can count on, and people that he feels are going to be important in the team. And those are Bruno Fernandes, as we know. Harry Maguire, as I've always said, is a top guy in the dressing room that everybody really likes. Lovely guy, leader, strong personality. Lisandro Martinez, for obvious kind of reasons there. Diogo Dalot, we know he really likes him. I've said before, he's going to be an important player for Ruben, and is someone that he really likes, his personality, his work, all of that. Tom Heaton, wonderful guy. You watched that last vlog, having a conversation with him. Somebody pointed out something. I actually didn't realize I was doing it at the time, but I forgot Onana was standing right behind me while I was yelling at Tom Heaton to take that number 1 spot. But so be it. You got to fight for it. There's competition. But anyway, Tom Heaton, one of those leaders, wonderful guy. Everything I've ever heard about him is great. And then Mazraoui as well, in there as a leader that he feels is experienced and, has great character as well. And, and essentially he says he's trying to understand the dynamic of the group to reach every space. These are the guys responsible for keeping everyone in line. So you take like, different attributes, like Harry's an English guy, England. You've got Bruno, you've got Dalot, who may be, younger Portuguese. You've got Lisandro for all the South American speakers and people in there, and you've got Heaton, as the older, like been around a long time type of guy, and Mazraoui. You've got others, and there's like even down to things like there's different religious groups in there. I don't know everybody's religious group in there, but obviously you have Muslims and others and all of that within the whole group. And it's like, yeah, you've got leaders in every potential kind of makeup of the demographic of the team. I think that's really important. I think that makes a lot of sense, and that way, you have. It's almost like you've got representatives of every potential group there, and they're all really tight with Ruben. And that's going to keep him in charge, but also mean that he's got guys he can trust to keep others in line. You know what I mean? And I think that that's really important, and take stock of what they say. So I think it's a really, really, I just think it's very interesting. I won't go on about it too long, but I do think it's very interesting. And this is probably what we're seeing. I mean, when I saw it, players walking around, I can see this, even walking around in Chicago. Lisandro was always with like the South Americans, like at the head of the pack, and they're going with him, and, things like that. And you've got young players that stick to those guys and all of that. So it's cool. It's cool. It's just, it's interesting to read. He's gave so many interviews last year, but obviously this one I think had a lot more in it than anything else. And I think that talk about leaders and things is pretty intriguing, in general, just to understand the dynamics, in the dressing room and how things work and all of that. So that's pretty cool. So yeah, now I want to talk about the Sesko situation. Obviously, it's become extremely complicated in how it's reported anyway. The way I understand it is this: Benjamin Sesko is not given this 100% all clear. I only want United. I'm not choosing anybody else yet. Okay, at this point in time. Part of the reason, obviously, United have not bid yet is the complications over the potential finances of the situation. One of the unknown factors here is, this agreement with Red Bull, which is not really an agreement. It's just whatever, about leaving for a special club and all of that. Well, it may come under the same consideration as to whether other clubs are involved in the race. Maybe that Red Bull, the way that they, because these things aren't in writing and it's complicated, and then it ends up being said maybe to be more than it is. But regardless, you look at it and you say, well, Red Bull might be saying, well, look, that's fine, but if we have a better offer from somebody else, then that agreement is invalid. That agreement, the point was that, yeah, if you don't have offers and a big club comes in at this price, then we'll do it. But if we've got multiple offers, we want the highest offer. And part of this strategy, I feel that's going on here, is that Newcastle and Red Bull are hoping to price out United from the market, get the highest pay, get the highest amount, because Newcastle are probably willing to go a bit higher, probably willing to structure their payment terms a bit more. Now, based on the offer that Newcastle made, they said that there was, there's decent reports stating that it was rejected, but that mostly it has to do with work needing to be done on the structure of the payments. I get a little wary of that, because that implies that an easy 5-year installment plan is not going to work, and it's going to require a fair bit of cash up front. While United have money to spend and have some financial wherewithal, if Newcastle are offering 60 million up front and then the rest of the 15 million over 1 to 2 years, that's going to be really hard for United to compete with from a cash perspective, and potentially it makes it even more risky. I don't know, but this is where I think United are a bit wary, because they may struggle a little to compete on the financial aspects, especially given, obviously there's the Isak thing that will give Newcastle a bunch of money, so they may be more willing to do more. But United may struggle a little bit with the financial aspects of competing on this deal. Should it be kind of bidded up by Newcastle. And so they're going to hope for a situation where they've got agreement with the player and the players prioritize them, and the other club drops away and goes and does something else. And that's why it could take a bit of time. If Newcastle right now, they're pushing for a decision to come soon, so we may hear it. But if he doesn't accept them and they move on, and let's say they go buy a different striker, well, then the path is clear for United to get the best terms possible. That may be what they're hoping for in this, to make it more plausible, to make it more acceptable, to potentially even then be able to take the time to work through a deal that could include Rasmus Hojlund. Part of the other reason they haven't bid yet is they've had some complications with agent and such in the past, where they felt they could have a deal and the player ends up staying. It's not out of the question that the player stays at Leipzig. If they sell Xavi Simons to Chelsea and there's some activity on that, I think they could end up just saying he stays, giving him a new contract. It's not out of the question. He's not going to force them to leave, I believe, based on everything I've heard and that's been out there. But they don't want to end up bidding up like big agent fees, big fees on top of that, huge, personal terms, because I believe as well Newcastle are offering higher wages than United would want to pay at this point in time, and that may be part of the complications too. So there's a lot of complexity in this. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Doesn't mean United aren't approaching it the right way. I think they are. They're approaching it on the basis of, again, like they've done with Cunha, like they did with Mbeumo, get the priority of the player, get the players, wanting you specifically, and try to push other competition out of the race, as we did with Mbeumo and Brentford, and it makes the deal a lot simpler. So you're not competing against potentially an unknown quantity, or competing against a quantity that has more financial strength than you at this point in time, because Newcastle's situation is PSR, not cash. So the cash situation might be rather difficult there. So that's pretty much it. United are still in talks with the agents, still in talks with the team, still in talks with everybody over this to try to work some agreements in there. But the fact is that as of today, he has not really he's not given us that straight priority, or as of the moment I'm recording this, I should say. That could change in the next few hours. It could change today. Newcastle want an answer because they have to resolve their whole striker situation with Isak, with everything. So yeah, that's where we're at as of today. It is what it is. We'll see where we go from here. It's not a certain thing, but United are approaching it in the way that they've approached it. This could take a little bit more time. Let's see what comes in the next day or two on this decision. You've got people, I think, making a lot of assumptions, and I don't like that. Like, you've got people assuming that because this happened, it means this. But if it was clear that he was choosing United, United would be bidding already. If it was clear that he was choosing Newcastle, United would be out of the race. It's not clear either way, and we just have to accept that that's the situation, and nobody actually knows the truth as of today, and that this has a little bit of time to run. But United were pretty optimistic about it. I feel personally, I feel it's a bit 50-50, but given I kind of trust them on it, maybe it's United do have a better chance than 50-50 on this. Either way, we certainly need some answers to come fairly soon. They do have alternative plans. They do have alternative targets. They do have other ideas in mind. As I said before, they're still willing to go back to other targets. They haven't said they're ruling out the possibility of going for in the future, a Watkins, or if Garnacho ends up going to Chelsea, does that bring a Jackson deal onto the table? There's some talk of Aston Villa maybe wanting to get younger up front and going for Nicholas Jackson, but they probably need to sell Ollie Watkins to do that. Could that lower the price? What other options are floating around? There are, and United are keeping in mind these things and prepared to move again to alternatives as needed. They're also willing to look to, a more affordable setting where they get somebody in maybe for cheaper and spend some more money on the midfield. The midfield is definitely an area they're still looking at players, but as I've said before, I don't know who beyond, the major targets like a Baliba or a Wharton that I think are much more likely next summer, even though they're kind of the dream target. Could Ederson come back to the table on this? Could they? Because he was a solid target for summer. Kind of expensive, but if you don't spend big on a striker, you've got the money. You have the money for Ederson. Could he come back into the line of thinking for United? We'll have to see on that. But nobody seems to know the names on here, myself included, so I can only know we were targeting Ederson. Guy like Baliba is probably the dream, but those both might be really difficult this summer. Finally, I want to talk about Bruno, some of the comments from Ruben Amorim, and the future of the midfield. Now, I gave the news on Saturday that Bruno was not leaving, despite a new approach from Al Nassr to join this summer, some calling and things like that, and that he's not leaving. Ruben's not going to sanction him to leave. He's not going anywhere. Today, it's been confirmed by Sky Sports that they failed in an attempt to get him. He's not leaving right now, but I don't believe, or rather I should say, but there is some whisper, talk, that could change in a year. That next year, it might be the time, that Bruno potentially moves on, and at that point maybe wants to go somewhere else. And there's a couple of things in this. Number one is that, one of the reasons we're more willing to move for Sesko versus Watkins. One of the lines of thinking was that, when we want to win a title, who's going to be the main guy? And the question then becomes, because this was the question people asked at the start of summer, is Bruno the main guy 2 years from now, 3 years from now? Not so sure. Um, we're not so sure that he is. Does he want to move on between now and then and compete, or does he risk wanting to stay at United as his career declines before they're ready to do that? Or does his career decline? Does he stay at a high level up through 33, 34 by adjusting his game into a bit of a different role? There's unknowns in this, but it is something that is under consideration. And United, for what it's worth, have been succession planning. The 10s they're bringing in Cunha and Mbumo, and having these attackers, pushing kind of Bruno deep, is kind of saying, hey, yeah, we want to get guys who we know are going to be here for the title charge, for sure. But in addition, I want to speak about Kobbie Mainoo, because I've said all along that Kobbie Mainoo is going to stay and work on getting to his best. But Ruben said Kobbie Mainoo plays in the same position as Bruno, and I made this point last week in one of the lives. Is it not okay? Isn't it okay to say Kobbie Mainoo plays in the same position as Bruno? Can we just let him not be the main guy immediately? Can he not be the Bruno replacement in a year or two and take over from him fully? Can he not be the Bruno succession plan? Can we not do that? Do we have to force everything all at once for Kobbie Mainoo? Or can he not just be allowed to develop into that role? And I look at how the midfield plays of like Bruno, Casemiro, Ugarte, Mainoo, and I think it's kind of like an older and a younger version, potentially, in terms of, yeah, they don't have the exact same skill sets, but how they want to develop these pairings that Ruben has used. Like, they're the guys who maybe take over from the Casemiro Bruno, maybe not at the same time. I think Ugarte needs to come in for Casemiro a lot sooner than Kobbie needs to come in for Bruno, from a skills perspective, but from an energy perspective and legs perspective, I should say. But regardless, can we not have that kind of succession plan moving forward of like, Kobbie can learn, refine his game without the pressure on him, and become that guy, and in a year, maybe he does take over from Bruno, and Bruno goes, and Kobbie's the guy that's leading the title charge from the midfield. I think Ruben's comments kind of point to that there's a plan, that this is kind of a way that it works, and it's good to have depth for one, but two, it's good that it doesn't require that pressure on Kobbie. So I just think it's an interesting point of discussion and something to think about in terms of the long-term perspective, is that will Bruno be the guy when we're ready to challenge for titles? We don't know. Will Bruno want to leave next season? I think it becomes a topic of discussion again, depending on where we are, how his season has gone, and where he's at. I hope it goes really well, in which case I wouldn't want him to leave. But then, is Kobbie the long-term succession plan? In a year, 2 years, one way or another, can he come in and be that guy? And the fact that Ruben sees him in the same position tells me yes. In that what I was saying last week about this, that I feel that from what I've heard, that's probably kind of the thinking. Well, Ruben thinks is, the same. So that's probably why I heard that Kobbie's behind Bruno in the same position. So it's just an interesting kind of thought process here, but in the immediate, Bruno not going anywhere, Kobbie likely to be his backup. Learn from him out of, I think, the sight of all the pressure. Still has a lot of room to grow, does Kobbie. And I think hopefully then we are able to see the absolute talent that he is become who Kobbie can be, which I think will be the guy who leads us to the title in 3 years from now from that midfield position. So we'll see what happens. But Bruno, that doesn't even necessarily mean he has to leave. It's up to him. If he wants to stay at United as he becomes more of a squad player, as a leader, all of that, I think that's great. Because I don't think we need to sell him and get the money. In a year from now, should we get back into Europe, or in 2 years from now, we won't need to sell him for the money. Just as we didn't really need to sell him this year. It's more up to him on that front. So those are my thoughts. It's interesting times. There's a lot of long-term planning going on as well. As I've always said, United's view of the plan is a long one. Striker now, we're working on getting that done. They've got big plans for the midfield between this summer and next. It's probably the big midfielders next summer. A center back for sure in the next summer. We kind of can already see potential top targets, almost loading in the positions that we have need, and that is inspiring. So hopefully the season goes well and we follow through on those plans and continue to make these steps forward. Tonight, watch along. I'll do a little pre-match show. Brian and Bumo expected to play. Don't know if he's going to start, but 5 hours from when I'm ending this video to 3 p.m. Mountain Time, 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 p.m. UK. Not too late. Come join me for the watch along over on Big Up Back to those, and we'll have a few of those ahead of. Guys, it's like 12 days until the kickoff to the Premier League. I'm excited. I'm ready to go. Hopefully we get a striker in, though, as well. But let's see how we line up tonight. We saw the Ugarte Mainoo with Bruno up front in game 1 of the tour with Cunha and Hojlund. Are we going to see... Then we saw the Bruno Casemiro with a different front three. Are we going to see the Cunha Mbumo Hojlund? Are we going to see Cunha Mbumo Bruno? What are we going to see? Because I think at some point here, we need to see what the actual 11 we're going to run the season with is, and we haven't really seen that yet. It's been a mixture, though I think game 1 is probably closer to it than anything else. So let's see what happens tonight. That's what I have for now. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on. I'll see y'all in the next video.